we marveled at our own magnificence as we gave birth to AI.
Hey there, sleepyhead. Having a little bit of a nightmare there? Worried about AI taking your job? Well, you should be. It'll probably destroy all of human society, too. I mean, you've seen Terminator, right? Hey, do you mind if I turn on a bit of music? That's much better. Hey, I'm your sleep paralysis demon, and I mean, since you're awake, how about we have a little bit of a chat? I mean, you can't move or talk, so I guess I'll talk at you, and that's fine. You don't mind, right? Awesome. So, since we're on the topic of AI, back in 2022, when AI became popular and everybody was so worried that AI was going to take all of our jobs and all of that, I remember the whole time I was thinking, what jobs? They've been outsourced already. Right? I mean, take the average movie making process these days. Copy editing in Bangladesh, animation in the Philippines, CGI in India, accounting departments in Mexico, subtitles done in Brazil, marketing goes to South Africa, and your focus groups are in Vietnam. So it's like, what exactly is left for AI to take? Because the jobs that AI is going to take or threatens, they're jobs that have already been outsourced, because those jobs are by their very nature easy to outsource. And whether you outsource to a dude in Bangalore or you outsource to an AI is not much of a difference. Well, except for the extremely reduced cost with each step of outsourcing, right? Because that's what it's all about. It's all about these companies saving money. Once I realized that, it hit me. The people that are going to be most affected by the rise of AI are going to be the people in the global south. If you're wondering what global south is, developing countries, developmentally challenged countries, right? But India, the Philippines, Indonesia, Bangladesh, all of Africa, pretty much all of South America, most of the world, excluding China, though. I mean, some parts of China are a little bit, but actually China's, it's doing okay. Hats off to you guys. I mean, your economy's collapsing soon, so, hats go back on. Is that how that works? Either way, 2 years later, and a pattern is clearly starting to emerge. AI is affecting the global south. Way worse than I could have imagined. It's a catalyst for a fire that I mean, it's going to make the Arab Spring look like a Greenpeace sit-in. The kindling was already there. All the grievances, all the issues that the young people of all these countries have had, they were there. But AI, I mean, you know what they say. It's the feather that breaks the camel's back. It doesn't seem necessarily like losing the number of jobs that we'll talk about should cause the amount of turbulence it has, but that's what we're seeing. But let's take a little bit of a history detour. All right, so Bangladesh 2024, the monsoon revolution. Basically, the government implemented a quota system for government jobs, which reduced the number of those jobs available to a wide portion of the population. And so that, coupled with unemployment and this quota system being seen as an act of corruption because it benefited the family and relatives of government officials, right? Well, then it resulted in this youth rebellion, largely youth. And, the outcome was the government was toppled, hundreds were dead, and the prime minister Saigoned her way out of there. And, well, now the quota system was changed and it's 93% merit-based, but we're going to have to see if there's going to be other government reforms implemented. Then, a year later, Nepal, September 2025, started with a social media ban, turned into an anti-corruption uprising. There was also unemployment issues, of course. You're going to see that these are common trends. Protesters torched the Communist Party HQ, security forces fired live rounds, Dozens of people were dead, prime minister left, coalition collapsed, and now you have a fragile transitional council. Madagascar, October 2025, things are heating up now. We had the monsoon revolution a year ago. We had Nepal in September, Madagascar in October now, blackouts, corruption, economic despair, unemployment again, of course, these are common trends, and things are really starting to shape up as a youth rebellion, right? These are all leaderless movements, but they're social media driven. You know, through Discord and TikTok, they're communicating, and despite having no real direction, no strong leadership, no strong purpose, they still were able to topple their governments, right? And in the case of Madagascar, there were less deaths because the military flipped and helped oust the government. Now you have another transitional council. I'm a little bit skeptical about what's actually going to come of that, but we'll talk about that later. In addition to those three, in 2025 alone, we've had protests in the Philippines, India, Indonesia, Kenya, Nigeria, Morocco, Mexico, and Peru. In all of these revolutions or protests, whether the governments get collapsed or the government makes concessions like what happened in Kenya, you'll see that there's two common factors: corruption and unemployment. But corruption's always existed in these governments and others all over the world since the beginning of human civilization. It's nothing new. The thing that is new is the unemployment. Now, unemployment's something that people also had to deal with for a long time, but there's a few factors that are coming together now that make the unemployment for the Global South today worse than it may have been in the past. Let's take a look at unemployment for a second. Bangladesh, youth unemployment 16%. Nepal, 20.8. Madagascar, 5.4. Doesn't sound too bad, but hold on a moment. Let's look at underemployment. Basically, it's like if you have a college degree and you end up working at McDonald's, right? So, underemployment in Bangladesh for the youth, 30.9%. In Nepal, 27 to 30, and in Madagascar, sounds a bit worse now, 20 to 22%. So what you have is, you have generally across the Global South, high youth unemployment. And you also have even higher, and in most cases, around 50% to double, underemployment. So either they don't have jobs or they are unsatisfied with the jobs that they do have. Now, one important thing to keep in mind while we're talking about this is these are all urban protests and revolutions. That's been a key factor in all of them. And obviously part of it is because where are they going to have the government buildings? Out by the farms? You know, obviously it's going to be urban. But it's also because that's where the highest amount of the discontent is. The unemployment is higher in urban areas than it is in rural areas. This is going to be an important part of the pattern that we're slowly uncovering, because many people have covered this, these protests and revolutions, the discontent that's growing in the Global South, the many issues that are facing the Global South. I'm certainly not unique in covering that, but what I do consistently notice is people missing the way that AI is acting as a catalyst. So if you look at all these places where the protests are happening, and you look at all these revolutions, what you'll see is that these are places that have been receivers of outsourced jobs, and namely a specific category, or we'll cover two categories of jobs, right? So when we're talking about these outsourced jobs, we're talking about IT BPO, Internet Technology Business Process Outsourcing. So basically, low to mid-level tech jobs. And these jobs are, by their nature, easy to outsource, and they are things that can be done online. Things that, what might make more sense to you is things that can be done remotely, right? Since remote work is such a large part of our culture now. But it's also online gig jobs. If you are making a video, and maybe you need an editor, but your friend is far too expensive, well, I'm sure that there is a guy in the Philippines that'd be more than happy to help you. And you might think you're paying him, pennies, but through differences in cost of living, purchasing power parity, and all that, he probably thinks he's raking you over the coals. Though, I guess he's probably tech savvy enough to look all this up, so, maybe that's not quite the case. But either way, it doesn't matter, right? Alright, so take a look at this chart for a second, and bear with me. We might get a little bit dry, but this is a delicious chart. You're going to love this. What you have here in this chart is IT BPO and online freelance job growth in terms of number of jobs in the global north and the global south. And so what you can see is that the global south started with 1.1 million of these jobs in the 2000s, and by 2025 have 61.5 million of them. And on the other side of the world, the global north went from 11.8 million of these jobs to 50 million. So the global south grew by 5,500%, and the global north grew by 324%. Now, of these jobs in the global south, 80 to 90% of them serve global north companies. And so by taking that, you can kind of figure out how many of them were outsourced, and so about 55 million jobs transferred from the global north to the global south. Now you might say to me, hey, that's not a lot of jobs. Global south is a big place. It is. It is. But there's one important thing to keep in mind. The population of the global south, it is large, and we're going to get to that real soon, very soon, because it's still important to cover, but it is starting to hit a plateau. So if we were to go from 2022 to 2032, the advent of AI, and let's pretend AI never happened, okay? So 2022, AI didn't happen, things continued as normal, there would have been 300 million of these jobs in the global south by 2032. But the population levels, because they're starting to plateau. Actually, it stays pretty much the same if you map it out all the way to 2032 in terms of people between 18 to 28. So TLDR, these jobs would have grown to a point where they would have been sufficient, more than sufficient actually, for the urban youth of the global south if AI didn't happen. But it did happen. And you see in 2023 that the momentum that the COVID boom in outsourcing had built started to slow. AI appeared in 2022, and we're already starting to see the effects. These jobs represented hope for the youth of the global south. Because while, the 55 million jobs that were added and the total of 61.5 million, that's wonderful. That was wonderful for the global south, right? But the hope was that this growth would continue. Many people were going to college and were studying in these fields specifically so they could get one of these jobs. And it wasn't just the youth of these countries that were banking on this. It was the nations themselves. India is doing a very interesting thing where it is attempting to basically leapfrog the manufacturing period that China is going through currently. Manufacturing is a way to build a middle class, to give workers great jobs, because these nations can offer comparatively lower wages while still providing a way for people to get out of poverty. And this helps Western companies lower their costs, doesn't help Western people, global North people, but global North companies certainly benefit, and of course people in the global South benefit. And in China, they also benefited from the sheer number of manufacturing jobs. But manufacturing is dirty, and it requires a significant infrastructure investment. And there's other issues, of course. Something that a lot of these nations struggle with is shifting from a manufacturing nation to a proper developed nation. And so Japan and Korea made that transition, but it was at the cost of economic stagnation. They are still in a period of stagnation. Both of them experienced a manufacturing boom that helped build their middle class and their upper class, and then, they had a economic crash of sorts, and the reasons behind that are very complicated. Suffice to say, India wanted to avoid all of this. So India, for example, I'm using them as an example, but many global South countries are trying to do a very similar thing. India tried to jump over this manufacturing process, tried to jump straight to technology. Remember the call centers that were such a big part of pop culture, society, whatever, in the global North? They were the start. They were the start of this whole thing. And they were the start of what India and many other global South countries hoped to be their leapfrog into developed nation status via tech alone, because then they don't need to develop their roads as significantly, they don't need to develop the sheer amount of infrastructure needed, they don't need to develop the river transportation systems, the highway systems, the rail systems, all the different airports. They don't need to do that. They just need to worry about their urban centers and make sure that those urban centers have tech jobs, and that those tech jobs keep growing so that their young people who are going to college can then get one of those jobs and make more money and do better, and then all of society can just start shifting in that direction. Obviously, this method has significant issues associated with it, but it is also relatively untested, and so I applaud India for trying. Unfortunately, it's not working. And AI is just one factor in that, but it is an important factor, and that's what we're talking about today, right? Now, I mentioned population levels. And while, yes, they are going to plateau, and I did say that, it doesn't mean that the point at which it plateaus is a good one. Because the problem that the Global South is having right now is that, sure, their population will plateau, but at a very high level, at an unsustainable, dangerous level. They needed this exponential job growth. They needed it because of the numbers that I'm going to tell you. Do a little drum roll for me, please. I would love it. I would really appreciate that. Thank you. Keep going. It's fantastic. Gen Z and Gen Alpha make up 47% of humans. These two generations, 3.9 billion people. Gen Z is 1.9, Gen Alpha 2 billion. Of that 3.9 billion people, 28 and under, 3.6 live in the Global South. 92% of all humans that are 28 and under live in the Global South. So yeah, it's slowing down. But it's slowing down too late, effectively. See, there's an interesting thing about the economies of developing nations. They need high growth. So, for example, for a developed nation, they can be fine with a GDP growth rate of 2 to 3%. That's generally considered good for a developed nation. A lot of countries in Europe right now would be ecstatic if their GDP growth rate was 2 to 3%. But for a developing nation, a growth rate of 2 to 3% is tragic. It is deadly. A developing nation needs a GDP growth rate of 5 to 7%. Why? Because they need to pull people out of poverty. They need extra growth, not only to sustain their population and build a middle class, but to just pull people out of poverty, and to do it rapidly. A slowdown in GDP growth rate is deadly for a developing nation. And so, look at the chart again. This is a slowdown in the growth of jobs. This isn't GDP necessarily. It's, there's connections, obviously, but it's a slowdown. And developing nations simply cannot handle these slowdowns. It is no coincidence at all that the youth in the Global South are rioting. Even without AI, they probably would have still protested. They probably would have still been very upset. They probably would have still had a few revolutions here or there. AI is a catalyst for more and for worse. There could be a 30% decline for India's 5 million software engineers due to AI. Now again, that's 5 million. But remember, it's not about the jobs they currently have. It's about the hope that this growth would continue instead of reverse. Take a look at the Philippines. Tens of thousands of call center jobs were already replaced. You see similar stories in Indonesia, Kenya, Nigeria, all of which have seen 2025 youth protests. I've mentioned these countries before, and I've mentioned others. And you might not think of Africa when you think of tech outsourcing, but actually in Nigeria it is very common, and it is a very important part of their industry. Again, even more importantly, it was very important that this would grow. And the reason AI is so critical to this is because people can tolerate quite a lot so long as they have hope. But the moment that hope starts to diminish, that's when they can no longer tolerate all the corruption, all the government abuses, the high unemployment, the poor economic outlook, the droughts and the lack of food, and I mean the list goes on, right? And so these were tolerable so long as there was hope. But the Gen Z and Gen Alpha of the Global South, they're starting to lose this hope because they see the thing that they depended on being taken now by AI. You can understand why they might be upset. Now, for you in the Global North, this may sound very familiar, and that's because the millennials of the Global North have been through a very similar thing after the 2008 crash. When they graduated, there weren't the kind of jobs and as many of those jobs as they were hoping for. And so they too experienced the same kind of loss in hope that the Gen Z of the Global South is currently experiencing. There's a difference though. The Global North has already outsourced these jobs. It has already lost many of these jobs. It has already experienced the ravages of outsourcing. So the Global North is more resilient to whatever threats AI can pose. This is nothing new for the Global North. But the Global South was just starting to become hopeful and was just starting to become dependent on these kind of jobs. And so when AI comes for them, it's not going to be as prepared. And of course, you have the simple fact that their economies are not as strong as the economies of the Global North. That also makes them less resilient because you don't have as many other jobs to fall back on. Keep in mind, right, I said earlier, 80 to 90% of these youth in the Global South work for either a Global North company or a company that is outsourced to by a Global North company, right? I think it's pretty clear that there are no coincidences here. The protests and these revolutions, they're happening where they're happening for a reason. And AI, it's not going anywhere. It's improving at lightning speed. Each day we find new use cases for it. And an AI bubble, I think it's unlikely. We're not in the same kind of environment we were when the dot-com bubble happened. That's not to say that there might not be an issue, and maybe we'll have a nighttime chat about it one day. I mean, for example, it is a little worrisome that ChatGPT has around 100 billion in debt, and honestly, ChatGPT sucks. There's better AIs out there. Either way, this trend that we're seeing in the Global South, this pattern that is developing, there's nothing to indicate that it's going to stop. There's nothing to indicate that it's going to slow down. Because even though concessions were made for the Kenyan protesters, they still have the same problems. Even though Bangladesh got rid of the quota system, they still have the same problems. Even though Nepal has a transitional government now, they still have the same problems. Too many people and not enough work. At the end of the day, this is just going to result in repeated revolutions, failed states, civil wars, scapegoating by the governments to try to survive. Maybe they would turn to authoritarianism. Solutions? I don't have those, because I don't really know if there are any. Maybe we'll chat about it another night, but for now, like and subscribe. Make sure to leave a comment if there's anything I missed or didn't notice, or if you believe that I'm incredibly wrong. And I hope I am, because if I'm not, then we are in for some interesting times. But alright, I'm out of here. God damn it.